following the confirmation that Boris Johnson did attend a Downing Street party during lockdown, one of the first senior Tories to call for him to resign was Douglas Ross. Ross is an MP in Westminster and also an MSP in Holyrood and a leader of the Scottish Tories. He said this on Wednesday.
If the Prime Minister attended this gathering party event in Downing Street on the 20th of May, then he could not continue as Prime Minister. So regretfully, I have to say that his position is no longer tenable. I spoke to the Prime Minister this afternoon and I set out my reasons and I explained to him my position.
How did he respond?
I think discussions between myself and the Prime Minister understandably remain between us. He believes that he didn't do anything wrong and he has put up a defence for his position. But I also have to look at the information I've got in front of me and to stick with the position that I made quite clear yesterday, that if he did attend that party, he couldn't continue as Prime Minister.
So on the same evening of that statement, Jacob Rees-Mogg went on to Newsnight to defend the Prime Minister. He was asked about Ross's position and said this.
I would actually say that the Secretary of State for Scotland, who is a big figure, is very supportive of the Prime Minister, has made that absolutely clear. Douglas Ross has always been quite a lightweight figure, so I don't think that his...
Sorry, hang on.
And
the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, an MSP an MP is a lightweight figure.
I think the Scottish Secretary is a much more substantial and important figure in this.
Scottish MSPs.
My producer, James Fox, has just pointed out that sounded a little bit like a sort of Eton version of a diss track from Jacob Rees-Mogg. They're talking very tough. It wasn't just a slight on a Conservative colleague, though, what Rees-Mogg said there. It was also an indication about what the Tory cabinet think about Scotland. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives is elected by Scottish Tories, and Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks he's a lightweight. In contrast, the Scotland Secretary is appointed in Westminster, and for Rees-Mogg, it's the Scotland Secretary who counts as a substantial figure. That disparity was not lost on Nicola Sturgeon.
I think, as we've just seen, have big political differences with Douglas Ross, but even I'm not as derogatory about him as his own Tory colleagues are being. Not a big figure, lightweight. These might be personal insults directed at the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, but actually they say something much deeper about the Westminster establishment's utter contempt for Scotland. If they can't even show basic respect for their own colleagues, what chance do the rest of us have?
The Conservative Shadow Justice Minister in Holyrood, Jamie Green, also recognised the damage Rees-Mogg's comments could do to the Scottish Tories. This is how he hit back.
Not at all. He's a fine leader. He's got my full support.
What's your message to Jacob Rees-Mogg?
You should just go and have a long lie down, perhaps, preferably not in the House of Commons.
That was obviously a reference to that infamous picture of Jacob Rees-Mogg having a snooze on the benches in the House of Commons. Scottish Tories have now also suggested Boris Johnson will not be invited to their party conference. Aaron, the Downing Street parties are blowing apart the Conservative Party. Could it also blow apart the Union?
It's going to be a factor in terms of the broader political debate over the next several months, the next 2 years, but I don't think it'll be the nail in the coffin of the Union. I think going back to Rees-Mogg's kind of response on Newsnight, that was interesting because in politics, when you're under pressure and you're facing hostile questions, you have a few options. You defend, you attack, you counterattack, or you joke. And often Boris Johnson has not had to defend himself, and he's used the other three, which are incredibly powerful tools, because defending effectively is the hardest one to do. As he found out at Prime Minister's questions, it's very, very hard to defend and in any way get on the front foot by virtue of what you're doing. But sometimes you just have to do it because of the gravity of the situation. Of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg has one instinct, which is attack. So in a way, it's that can serve its purpose. It changes the conversation, it relieves pressure, but it also has its downsides. And here, he's basically shit talking potentially 31 of his colleagues. And it does show a dismissal for Scots by English Conservatives. Alistair Jack, who is the Scottish Secretary, has only been an MP since 2017. He has a tiny majority in his constituency. He's not really done anything of substance as a parliamentarian. I think Jacob Rees-Mogg thinks he's a more substantial figure because he's a private landowner. He's a very wealthy man. He's a multi-millionaire. That's probably what counts as important and esteemed and worthy of respect in Jacob Rees-Mogg's book. But as a political figure, I think he's just pulled that out of his backside. So it does show a basic contempt for Scots. And I think, if you look at all the opinion polling, even with Labour, even with these polls, that they're really not making big inroads into Scotland because the SNP are so on top of the political messaging and the culture and operationally, they're just such an established organisation up there. Very, very impressive. And I think you're right that this kind of rhetoric from the Conservatives, which has been the dominant rhetoric coming from the Conservatives since 2016, it does probably enhance the power of Scottish nationalists, and it does enhance their arguments. The thing is, of course, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson, they might not be in the driving seat of the Conservative Party for much longer. If it does try to go back to the centre to be a more moderate Cameroon-style party, I don't like David Cameron. I think in many ways he's the worst Prime Minister of my lifetime. Far more toxic than Boris Johnson if you look at the results and consequences of austerity. But if they do go back in that direction, then it doesn't mean they start winning seats back in Scotland, but it does begin to show that there isn't this huge chasm, this gulf between the politics of Scotland and England. Right now, that's getting sort of broader every day because people like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and Jacob Rees-Mogg, very conservative, very English political figures, are on the television. So, yeah, if Jacob Rees-Mogg is at the top of the Tory party for another couple of years, I think that definitely helps the cause of independence. But as we've spoken about so far, that looks less and less likely given the personal approval ratings of Boris Johnson.
That angle that Alistair Jack, the Scotland secretary, is a landowner and comes from aristocracy, whereas Douglas Ross doesn't. That had completely gone over my head, but that does make a lot of sense. I can imagine that was definitely an undercurrent there when Jacob Rees-Mogg says, this man is worth my attention, this man is not.
That's his calculus, right? And there is no other plausible explanation for it other than he's just making it up. So let's be charitable. Let's say there was a reason for him saying it. There you go. He's a landowner, he's wealthy, he looks and he sounds just like Jacob Rees-Mogg.